The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
Listeners of the Short Time Wrestling Podcast, I bring to you the pre-order for the 2018 Matt Talk Online NCAA Division I Fan Guide, the digital preview guide that's over 200 pages of facts, stats, results. If there is a result that happened in NCAA wrestling and that wrestler is in the NCAA Division I championships coming up in Cleveland, I guarantee you that result will be in the guide. Save yourself $5 by using the offer code podcast. Go to matttalkonline.com/fanguide18. Click the I want this button. Click order now, pre-order. It'll be digitally delivered to your inbox on March 13th, maybe even a skosh earlier. Over 200 pages of facts, stats, results. I stake my reputation on the claim that this is the single greatest thing that will add to your knowledge and experience at the NCAA championships. Everything you want to know about 330 wrestlers and all the teams competing, available. matttalkonline.com/fanguide18. Use the offer code podcast. Save yourself $5. It is a short-time listener exclusive. This is the product that ESPN and all the Mad Side broadcasters use, their production truck, their broadcasters. You name it, it's in there. Facts, stats, again, I've said results, pub trivia, all-American lists. You find out all these things from the NCAA championships. I could go on for an entire show about it, but right now, I'm just going to say, matttalkonline.com/fanguide18, offer code podcast. You will not be disappointed. So the Short Time Wrestling Podcast from the historic St. Paul Hotel here in St. Paul, Minnesota, talking with former Drexel head wrestling coach Jack Childs, one of our retired coaches who's still, wrestling coach can never actually retire, can they, Coach?
No, we don't. Never.
You
can take the coach out of wrestling, but you're never going to take wrestling out of the coach.
So before we get into what you're doing now, we'll talk about what you're doing here. Is you've got family here in Minnesota, and the last couple of years we've passed here and there. It's like, hey, we got to get up and have lunch. So let's first talk about the family you've got here in St. Paul and why you come to this climate in February.
Well, the cold doesn't bother me, for one thing. I'm from Northeast Pennsylvania, and but we come to see my daughter Beth, who's married to Greg Cummings, and we now have 2 granddaughters here, so it's important that we do make the trip. And it seems like it's convenient for us every year to come in the wintertime, too.
Well, in 2 years, it'll be convenient because the NCAA championships will be here, just one city over in Minneapolis. So it's like, okay, you can have an extended trip out here.
Oh, yes. And will be. I won't be because I'm working usually with the NCAA, and I will be then, too. Yeah.
So one thing that was also interesting, we went to lunch, and I got to know how you found this place. The place we went to was called the Gopher Bar, and it's in downtown St. Paul, just on the outskirts. And this is basically, if you're offended by bad language and bumper stickers that are crude, don't go in here. But if you like Coney Island hot dogs, this is a place. How did you stumble across this place?
Well, Greg said, "Do you want a Coney Island?" I said, "What do you mean Coney Island?" He said, "What do you call them? What do you call your hot dogs back home?" I said, "Texas Hots." He said, "We don't call them that here." So we went in, the guys, and he said, "What would you like?" I said, "I'll have a couple of Texas Hots." He said, "We don't have Texas Hots here." I said, "You have hot dogs?" He said, "Yeah, we call them Conies here." And the few choice words that he also put on there, as you heard today. So, but Greg knew about it, and it's supposedly the place that they go to watch hockey games and wrestling and football and anything else that deals with Minnesota, University of Minnesota.
What's also interesting is the colorful bumper stickers and language, but it also says the best bleeping Coney or something like that. And it was a fine, hot, really good hot dog. So yes. Good find there. I'm going to actually have to take a buddy of mine there too, because we'll understand. But he also told us, the bartender, who's a gruff individual, actually told us that Justin Timberlake came in there when they were in town for the Super Bowl, and it's no credit cards.
No credit.
And they make that abundantly clear that there's no credit cards with, again, choice words. And apparently one of his entourage had to use the ATM machine because all Justin Timberlake had on him was credit cards and plastic.
Yeah, he gave him $100 bill, he said. said, "You don't read at all, do you?" He said, so he had to give the 100 to his emissary, and he took it across the street, I guess, to the ATM and came back with some cash.
So as we talk about your career is in coaching and now retired, but let's just start right at the beginning, because even though you coached at Drexel for well over 3 decades and been in the sport for longer than that, a lot of people haven't heard your story and how you fell in love with wrestling and how you became a wrestling coach.
Well, that's really an interesting story. I never wrestled in high school. Well, my dad was our Coach Coach John, they call him, and he still Coach John. But he's
not Dad, he's Coach John.
He's Coach John, that's right. And but we never had wrestling in high school, and I'd always played basketball to stay in shape between football and track. And but I had to go out for the wrestling club, which he had. So that was my introduction to wrestling, really. And then when I went to Ithaca College, I went on a scholarship for football and track. But because I was in physical education, we had to go out for an intramural sport in between our seasons. So during the winter term, I wasn't going to play basketball anymore. So I decided, well, I'll go out for wrestling. And I became the heavyweight champion. At the time, you got to realize I was playing football, probably 230, 235. And so I was heavyweight champion. Well, at Christmas time, we had a dorm party, and I went to the heavyweight. We lived in a hospital at Ithaca College. That was our dorm at the time, an old hospital. They'd since long gone. But we went to a party, and the freshman heavyweight, he was from New York State, he wrecked his room. I mean, he had a private room in this hospital with the lights and the whole scene, and he just ripped it apart. So unbeknownst to us, when we came back, he was thrown out of school. And Herbie Broadwell was the coach there then, and he came up to me and he said, "Jack," he said, "I understand you're the intramural heavyweight champion." I said, "Yeah, Coach, I am." He said, "Well," he said, "we need a freshman heavyweight." At that time, they had freshmen and varsity. Freshmen could not wrestle varsity. You remember that, I think?
I wasn't around, but I'm definitely.
Yeah, well, this was back in 62, 3, 4.
Jack, anyway. I was born in 1979.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah. We'll talk more about that in a little bit.
So anyway, I said, "Coach," I said, "I know he got thrown out of school." I said, "I probably could have gotten thrown out of school too." I said, "I was at the same party he was." And he says, "Well," he said, "you're still here." And he said, "I need a freshman heavyweight." I said, "Coach, it's impossible. I can't do it." He said, "Why?" He said, "Because," I said, "there's some course." I said, "I got a heavy class load this time." I said, "Plus there's an activity course." I said, "I cannot get over this damn pommel horse." I said, "There is no way I can travel." He said, "Jack," he says, "I'll pass you in gymnastics." He said, "You don't have to go to it." I said, "Coach, I need a B." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "You got it." I said, "Okay." So that's how I really got into wrestling.
That couldn't happen these days anyway. I mean, well, it might be happening some places at some schools on the East Coast, but we won't go there with that type of thing.
No.
But that type of thing was kind of, I mean, you're talking what, a 1-credit activity class? Nothing
yeah,
big.
Sure. And I did when I transferred. Then they raised the tuition. You got to realize then tuition was only $1,700 to everything, $1,700 to go to college. Now
in-state or out-of-state, regardless?
Yeah, in-state, out-of-state, because it was a private school.
Mm-hmm.
So I got $1,600 off for football and track, which was great. I could afford to pay the $100, no problem. The next year, they upped the tuition to $2,700. I mean, not just tuition, but your rates were up to $2,700. And I said, there were about 12 or 13 of us that went in to see the football coach at the time. And he said, "Yeah," he said, "guys," he said, "I understand." He said, "But the board is going to meet. The alumni board was going to meet at Thanksgiving time, and they would know when we came back for Thanksgiving if we were going to get our scholarships were going to be raised or not." So we came back from Thanksgiving, and they called us all in. There were probably, like I said, 12, 14 of us. And I think 11 of us, we just ended up walking. We could not afford to stay at school. So I'd been accepted at East Stroudsburg, because my dad went there for one thing. And so I said, well, then I'm going to transfer to East Stroudsburg. And I called the coach up, and that's where I ended up going to school.
And now, which coach are you talking about? Football, wrestling, or track?
Well, this was football. This was just football. And Jack Gregory was the coach then. And but wrestling was still in my mind because, I enjoyed it. I really did. When I wrestled at Ithaca, I had 7 matches, and I think I was 4-2-1. You could tie at that time. But anyway, so you had to sit out a year, and I transferred in January. So from January to January, I couldn't do anything. But when they called for the wrestlers in October of the year that I was supposed to be sitting out, I figured, well, heck, I might as well go out for this. Is a great way to get in shape for football, spring football. So I went out for wrestling, and I hated it. The coach, he made us run. Here's a guy who's 235 pounds. I didn't like to run at all. But anyway, so I got in shape for football. And like in January, then, of course, I was eligible. And I went home because I figured I'm not going to run. And I get a call from Red Whitman. He was the wrestling coach there. And he said, Childs, what are you doing? I said, Coach. He said, it's spring. It's our break, Christmas break. He said, not for you. It's not. He said, you're in the wrestling program. He said, get your ass back to school. So I had to come back. And that's when I really started wrestling. I loved it then. And so for 2.5 years, I did wrestle at East Stroudsburg and got my letter. And I really enjoyed the sport. And I graduated from East Stroudsburg. My first job was in Fulton, New York, upstate.
Home of the Red Raiders.
Yeah, way up north. Yeah. But it's north of Syracuse. But anyway, because I could I coached football. I was headline coach. I was assistant JV or assistant wrestling, head JV wrestling coach. And then I was assistant track coach then too. And I coached, so for 2 years, I coached there. 1 year I coached in Fulton. Then I moved down to Binghamton, New York. And for 2 years, I was coached there. And then it was head wrestling, assistant football.
High school or college?
High school.
Okay.
Binghamton. It was Binghamton Central High School. And we had a very, our district in New York State, if you know anything about where we were or what New York State has to offer, it's probably, after Long Island, it's probably the second best wrestling district in the state. There's Ithaca, there's Binghamton, of course, Union Endicott, and Johnson City, all those schools. So
yes, Johnson City, you've got, to put it a current state of things on it, Josh Glenn's from Johnson City, Troy Nickerson's from the Binghamton area.
Yeah.
You got, those are the type of areas that you're talking about. John Jones is from the Union Endicott School District.
Yes, he is.
His brother Art, too. So that gives you the range of type of athletes and wrestlers you're getting from that area.
Right. So then it opened up. From there, I got a phone call, and it was the secretary at East Stroudsburg who I happened to babysit her kids when I was at East Stroudsburg. And she says, is there anything I can do for you? And I said, yes. I said, if anything ever opens up, it's a job position opens up, you think I might be interested in, I said, please give me a call. So she did. She called me up and told me that there was Stevens Trade had opened up. Well, we played football, against Stevens Trade when I was at Stroudsburg, and I knew the type of program they had there, and I knew the coaches and everything, because Johnny Johnson was there, who became head coach at Princeton University. I forget who the number of good coaches were at Stevens Trade in wrestling. So I figured, I said, this is an opportunity, but I called.
And Stevens Trade, that is, what's Thaddeus Stevens in Lancaster, Pennsylvania?
Thaddeus Stevens Trade School. Okay. It was then. And if they'd have been a junior college at that time, I would probably still be in Lancaster, because I just knew that I wanted to go into a national setting, and I knew I could be coach on a national level. So, but for 6 years, I stayed right there at Stevens Trade, and it was a great opportunity. I recruited well. I had good kids. We were 89, 16, I think, and 1 for the time. And we wrestled Blair Academy. That's where I got to wrestle. My best kid, I moved him up in his only loss, and he lost to a boy that became a national champion and went to Iowa State, he's retired now, I think, but he went into this civil service in the FBI, and that was, I can't think of his name. Jason?
It's you're putting me on the spot trying to dig through the history of the 70s. So.
Yeah, well, it'll come to me. But anyway, I knew wrestling then because I had called Red up prior to taking the job, and Red said, "You want to get into college coaching?" He said, "That's your next step." So and I knew, in football, they just so-so. They were just, Stevens was just so-so in football.
Well, and when you mentioned Blair Academy, you mean like in that era, the post-grad teams were sizable. It's not like now where you might see 1 or 2 people do a PG, but there it's basically their college freshman team, that kind of that gap year where they're like, okay, they're not seniors in high school, but they're not college freshmen. Right. Those are the teams that you were playing against.
Yes, and college freshmen too.
Okay.
Because colleges still then, they had college JVs. Kelly Ward is the person.
That was going to be my
Blair
guess, because he's from Maryland.
Yes, right. But anyway, we went to the Millersville Open at the time. We went to Lock Haven. We wrestled their JVs.
The Millersville Open at the time wasn't yet named the Shorty Hitchcock.
No, Shorty wasn't. I didn't even think Shorty was born then.
No, well, that's another wormhole we can get down.
But what happened was, and we won that tournament. We won the Millersville Open a couple of times because I would recruit really good wrestlers, and I had a pipeline. I think from at that time my pipeline was from the Harrisburg area, so I would go over to Cedar Crest. I'd go to Lower Dolphin, Central Dolphin, Harrisburg High School, and bring kids in, and we had a fantastic team. So for 6 years I was there, and then the job, actually, it had opened up before that. This was the third opportunity. They say 3 times the charm. Well, it was for me, because 2 years prior to when I took the job at Drexel University, John Semenik called me, came over, and I had my interview over there, and he showed me the new gymnasium, the DAC, and everything, what it was going to be like, and where we would have to wrestle, and I was very impressed. But my wife was just pregnant with our first son, Jesse, and we had our doctor there. Her mom was less than an hour away up in Reading, Reading, Pennsylvania, and we lived in Lancaster at the time. So,
do you remember what street you live on? Because I lived in Lancaster for 3 years, and it's quaint and awesome, and old charm, and you got Franklin and Marshall's colleges right there, and then the schools are right there. So I'm curious, what neighborhood?
We actually lived just outside of Lancaster on Millcross Road.
Which pike is that off of?
Well, it's off. I forget the name of the pike, actually, but the golf course was right behind us. There was a little creek that ran behind us, and the golf course was right over there. In fact, my dog, whom my dad gave us, and named him Trader, because that's where we were, Stevens Trade. That's how we were known as the Traders. He said, well, you got a dog named Trader now. But so I just knew in talking to Red Whitman that wrestling was what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And when I got that opportunity, and just, to go to Stevens, and then it opened up at Drexel. And the first time we couldn't take it. Second time he called and he said, Jack, something fell through. They had a guy that went back into high school coaching, I guess. And he said,
at the same time or a year?
No, a year later. Okay. It was only a year later. And he called. And I said, okay. I said, I know what you've got. I said, what's the salary? And he offered me like $500 less than what he offered me the year before. I said, John, I got a child.
You're supposed to sweeten the deal here.
I said, yeah. I said, you're supposed to supposed to come out. He said, that's all I've got. I said, it's impossible for me to take. He said, we've got a junior college coach who's a very good person. He said, he'll take the job. I said, then he's your man. And it was Rocco Forte who ended up, he was a national runner-up or NAIA champion at Bloomsburg, and he also wrestled at that time. They could, jump from the NAIA to the
schools that were dual affiliation.
Yeah,
could do that.
yeah. And but he didn't even last a year. Drexel was going to host at that time it was the East Coast Conference that they were in, and they were going to host the East Coast Conference that year, which they did do. But the tournament director was the assistant AD, Johnson Bowie, because they had fired the coach, and they didn't even have a team. So Drexel did not even have a wrestling team the year before. And so they called me up again.
Well, at the time, you had gone from Stevens to Middlesex, right?
No, I was still at Stevens the whole time, 6 years.
Okay.
I was there. So this is the third time, and they called me. I said, yep. I said, but John, I've been over twice. I said, there's no need for me to come. He said, Jack, you're our coach. He said, we want you. I said, and the salary is? And he gave me the same salary now that he'd given me 2 years ago.
So it was where you started.
Yeah, where I
started.
But
it was above the last offer, but it was still where you had started.
And I said, John, I've got to have $500 more. If my wife is going to just, she will not let me move at all. So what happened was he said, well, coach, he said, I'll have to get back to you. So he called me back later that afternoon, and he said, Jack, he said, I went to the board, and he said, the board said yes. He said, so you're our coach. And that's how it all started. So I went to
1976?
1976, and I ended up being runner-up to Dan Gable as the rookie coach of the year. If you can believe it or not, he won the conference, of course, and he went on. I think he won nationals that year. I'm not sure, but I had taken Drexel, and we hadn't had a winning team in 9 years, and yet we were 8-6-1 or something like that. 8-6, But I had a full program. And we wrestled good schools. We wrestled Temple, wrestled Penn, and at that time, Temple had a real good program too. So,
when this is just a couple years after, there's this split from the university and college divisions had different names. University scholarship became Division I. Below it, because Division II, Division III, and if you were a smaller school and you wanted to go scholarship, you were Division II. Non-scholarship, now we know it as Division III. Where was Drexel in terms of its athletic profile in those days? Because I didn't know a whole lot about it until you guys actually really joined the CAA back in like 2000. I really had to do some history there. But when talking to Gary Taylor last year about the schools they were wrestling, you wrestled Ryder a bunch, wrestled schools, you mentioned Temple, but where was Drexel aligned athletically, and where did the administration at that point see its goals for its wrestling program?
Well, that was one of the main questions I had. And he said, no. He said, we'll be Division I. We've dropped football, which was a big move for them, for Drexel University at the time. John and Mary Semenek were husband and wife. They were the only husband and wife athletic director team in the country. So that really helped. Also,
well, especially the wife, too, because at that time there weren't very many women's administrators in college athletics.
There were not. And they could see what was coming, too, with this Title IX. And I had probably to start with, I had 2.5, 3 scholarships. But Drexel was only $3,500 to go there. And that was tuition, room, board, and books. I gave a kid $1,000. His parents thought I walked on water. It was fantastic. Now, I started at Drexel at $13,500 too. So you can see where I started as to where, 35 years later, I was making some pretty decent money. Although my wife will tell you, she was the first grade elementary school teacher in Radnor School District, where we lived in Wayne, Pennsylvania. And she was making much more than I was. So that's the difference.
My wife makes a lot more than I do. I have no problem with that.
I understand.
We work in wrestling. Of course, our wives are going to make more than us, right?
Indeed. Yes, indeed. So,
what I'm curious about is Drexel once I've learned about the whole co-op system that they have there, right. and like one of your later All-Americans, Ryan Lushak, is a guy who really kind of just is the guy I point to as look what this guy did coming right out of college. I mean, it's set, but has that something that the school's always had? And how did
Yes,
you
it
really
is.
start to build that?
Yeah. And
into
I
recruiting?
really, when I found that out to begin with,
Well, what is it, first of all? So
well,
we can
Drexel's
kind of
a
explain.
5-year program. Now, you can go into the 4-year school. They have a 4-year program as well as a 5-year program, but every major that they have, 4 years, they also have a 5-year program in. What that is your first year, you're right on campus, fall, winter, spring, just like any school. Then your sophomore, pre-junior is what they call the extra year, and junior year, you're only in school for 6 months. And because of wrestling, we would wrestle. We were in school during the spring we were in school during the fall and winter, which encompasses the entire wrestling season. It doesn't start until September, and it ends in March, and that was the entire season. And then in the summer, or spring and summer, they were actually for those 6 months, they were in a job that was given to them by the university in their field of study. And when I say given to them by the university, I don't mean this. They channeled them. They had their academic advisor who would set them up with job interviews and everything. These guys, my guys, would be professional people by the second year that they were in school.
So, for examples, I don't know if Drexel has a broadcast and communications program. That's one I didn't look up when I was applying for colleges. But say hypothetically they did, and I'm a Drexel student. So, and I'm on the wrestling team. So, okay, semester starts just like any normal school, right around late August, early September. Mm-hmm. Then, okay, season's over, and then so basically the spring your trimester system right there, right?
Right.
So hypothetically, I could be an intern with the Philadelphia Phillies,
right?
If I'm a broadcasting guy, and then work for them, and then season's over. Oh, well, there it is. I'm in school, and some internships are paid, some aren't. The way it works now. So you're talking about job placement, and a lot of people that I guess at the time that were choosing Drexel, maybe not having the national champion aspiration. Sure, they want to be one, but they see the reality of the situations. I'm going to come out of college with a lot of experience and opportunity for really job placement.
Yeah. 85 to 90% of our students, not just the wrestlers, but our students, would go back to work for people they had co-op experience with. So it was a great, for me, it was a great recruiting tool also. Plus, they would earn between when I started, you got to realize it was $3,500, but these guys would earn between maybe $5,000 and $7,000. And then when they, as the years went by, like my last 5 years, my guys were earning between $12,000 and $14,000.
They might have been making more than you, Coach.
Oh, pretty much. Yeah. And then they would get a job right away, So they were
no debt.
Yeah, no. That's pretty much it. They got full scholarships, and at the time, I went from probably 2.5 up to maybe 7.5, 8 scholarships, and now they're fully funded. From what I know after talking with Coach Acevedo, yes.
As far as your career as a coach, I mean, starting there in '76 and 35 years, you had 2 All-Americans, and you didn't get the first one until I want to say 2003-ish in that range.
4, yeah.
2000, Rob Redmond was the first one, then Lushak a couple years after that. Yeah. But when people look at that on the surface and be like, well, what? They've only got 2 All-Americans? Well, that coach doesn't know what he's doing. I mean, what is your goal as a coach? What it was your goal for bringing kids on campus, dual meet theory? I mean, because there's a lot more that a coach can be measured success-wise than the number of people you put on the podium. What was your mindset in how you measured success and how you told your administrators we had a successful year?
That's a very interesting question, Jason. I appreciate you asking me that, because my goal when I first started, whether it was a Stevens trade or when I came into Drexel University, was to not just give them the skills that I had, and I would, my assistants would transfer their wrestling skills to these guys, but also it was to prepare them for life and the journeys they were going to have in life. In wrestling, it's you as you well know, there's only one winner.
Unless you're in Virginia, where you have 7 state champs away. Yeah. Anyway, that's another story entirely.
But there's only one guy that can. When you step on that mat, it's just you alone with the other person. And it was just, I would tell these guys, and you got to realize also, out of those 2 All-Americans, I had another, and I went back and counted them. There were 14, I want to say there were 16 guys that went to the round of 12.
Oh,
that could have been
brutal.
All-Americans.
And one of those guys, one of those that did make it through, Ryan Lushak, had to beat a national champion.
Yep.
Brian Stith, one of my kids from my home area.
Exactly.
You got to beat a national champ to place. That's how tough those weights are. I mean, so it seems to me that you're not hung up on the number of All-Americans that you have. You know that you've had countless more than that in the position to be that. When you look at the competitive landscape of college wrestling and how it's changed now, we've got regional training centers and things of that nature, and it seems like the rich get richer with the Big Ten having a lot of resources, whereas a Drexel, a Ryder, even before Tom Ryan showed up at Hofstra, there was battling for resources. And what is the struggle like in that era to keep bodies, to keep scholarships, to keep, in some cases, to keep the sport on campus?
Yeah. Well, you really have to be involved with what your athletes are doing, what your wrestlers are doing. And I was very close with my guys. In fact, I still meet with them. I went out for dinner 3 weeks ago. We went out for dinner up in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, with one of the guys that I had at Stevens Trade. And he's in his late 50s now. And you got to realize he was only, I said, "You're how old, Joe?" Joe Ivick is his name. And so I've kept those relationships year after year after year. It doesn't matter if it's Stevens Trade, it doesn't matter if it's Drexel. Even a heavyweight at Binghamton High School, his name is Robin Lee, is now found me on Facebook, and he calls me and we talk. And he says, "Coach, you remember what my nickname was? You gave it to me." I said, "Sure." I said, "You were ugly." And so he was, it's just, I would recruit the parents as much as I would recruit the athletes, because I had to know if the parents, if they got along with their kids, first of all, and what they could expect from me. And then also, I wanted their kids to see that what their parents were sacrificing for them to come to Drexel University, and for them to be a wrestler too. So it has been a great life, and I've really enjoyed it. My own 2 sons, they'll tell you that too. And my daughter, she keeps score. She knows my recruiting spiel the same as I could give it. She just knows, and she was an athlete too, a very good athlete at Drexel.
Yeah, before we started the interview, walking down to the hotel lobby here to record, your wife had told us that you told the story about your daughter being able to recruit the pitch, but also explained the story that before the internet, before Flow Wrestling, before YouTube, where you can sit in the office and watch a tournament from Reno, Nevada, from your office chair in Philadelphia, recruiting involved digging up newspapers and driving hour to get newspapers. So explain the early years of recruiting at Drexel and how you went about finding high school talent.
Well, I would know the kids that I would go to see over Christmas time. They said, "Why don't we go to the Midlands? Why don't we do this?" I would send my assistants, my good kids. I would send maybe 4 kids to the Midlands. Then they didn't even have that. They didn't have the Las Vegas Invitational. But when they did, we started going, and we were invited to that. We had to be in the top 20 to be invited. Well, every year we were invited back to it for 4 years, and we went to it. Virginia Duels, another big tournament. That was after Christmas, so it was okay. But over Christmas time, I would go up. There was never a Christmas time that I would not be home weekends, because I would be up in Bethlehem. I would be at the Bethlehem Christmas tournament, the
Hurricane, right?
The Hurricane, yes. And I would also be at Bethlehem Catholic, the Christmas tournament there, where Tony Izello, he had just a fantastic program then. And but these guys that I would follow, I would know who I was recruiting, I would follow. And I had to stay pretty much in Pennsylvania, where across the river in New Jersey, or if they were close in New York State, because I was born I was raised up in Athens, Pennsylvania, as I told you. It's right on the New York-Pennsylvania border. So if a kid from Binghamton or a kid from Olean, New York, or someplace, that I would know about, and I would follow them too. But on Sundays, I would just get up early, and if one of the kids were up, I'd grab them, and I said, come on, we're going for donuts and the paper, boy. And we would drive up to Phoenixville, which was maybe a half hour away from Lancaster, or a half hour away from...
Kind of almost in the middle.
Yeah. But they would have at their one pharmacy up there in Phoenixville, they had the Lancaster papers, they had the Allentown papers, they had the Phoenixville papers, and
Reading,
the Reading Eagle, yes. And these were all the guys I was recruiting anyway. So I would know. And then the Sunday night was my recruiting. That's when I got on the phone. And it was just, because they didn't have practice. So if they had practice, it was in the mornings usually. And I said, didn't you go to church this morning? And they'd say, no, Coach, we couldn't. We had wrestling practice. I said, okay. I said, well, at Drexel, I said, you'll have off on Sunday, you'll hope. So it was, it was a big difference then as far as the recruiting was concerned to what it is today. And but I don't know if they had the same camaraderie. The teams do once they get to your campus, don't get me wrong. But I don't think you have the same camaraderie as you do with the parents and the kids today that we had then. And I'm talking, and you could ask Dan Gable, you can ask Jay Robinson right here, how it changed over those years. So.
When did you start to see a difference in the negotiation tactics from maybe the parents? Because now they're like, okay, well, we're ranked so and so by Flow Wrestling. We're a 5-star recruit. Blah blah blah. There's a lot more competition. Where even now, the Drexels of the world are getting pretty good talent that are on those boards.
Yes, they are.
Obviously, in basketball, there's talk about bag drops and things like that. We don't have that in wrestling, thankfully, or at least not to my knowledge. But when did you start seeing like, man, these parents are a lot tougher to negotiate with than they used to be?
Yeah, well, you realize I've been retired now 7 years, and it probably started maybe 5 years. So it's been 12 years that I've seen the difference. In recruiting, where the parents are becoming much more, I won't say demanding or belligerent or anything else, but they seem to know, they think there's money out. Not every school is like a Penn State, is like a Iowa, is like an Oklahoma State, Oregon, where they have all this money. I just was looking at in fact, it was your column this morning, I read it, and that the Big Ten now has 81 qualifiers. The next conference that's
projected. I think you're referring to the
projection.
Nomad Road A, Flow Wrestling, projecting the field.
Yes.
So I'd say that's fairly close to accurate.
Yeah, and
by the time you listen to this, those of you listening to this they'll have since come out. So.
Sure, but the Eastern EIWAs, they're the next school down, and they only have 48. So it's a case of the rich getting richer, and you've really got to work hard. Like, I admire Matt Azevedo now, what he's done with who he's bringing in, and the fact that he's, this Austin DeSanto, yes, he's a good kid, and they got a transfer from Penn State who's there for his, he's there as a grad student now. But they're able to bring in the type of athletes that we didn't have that exposure to before. And now it's, so it's quite a bit different. I'm sure, I know it's a big, and the fact that Boise State now dropped their program, that's so ridiculous, and they blame Title IX on this. And I just want to say that Title IX is not the sole reason for our sport losing the number of athletes and the number of programs that we have. I still say that if these athletic directors, why they're hired is to go out and fundraise and keep the programs or make their programs as good as they can be. and they're just lazy as heck. I wrote.
And the thing is, we look at this like everybody should have. Oh well, Drexel, you should be wanting to compete for a national championship. Well, realistically, yeah, that'd be nice, but let's be honest. We don't have everything we need like an Iowa or a Penn State does. But that doesn't mean you can't be successful on a regional level, win 15, 16 dual meets a year, put 1,500, 2,000 fans in the stands, and okay, you get five kids to the tournament, 4 kids to the tournament, might get an All-American every now and then.
Yep.
That's nothing wrong with having those as goals.
No, nothing at all wrong with that, and that's very admirable. And I think if you see, you're going to see more schools adapt to that program, what you're talking about, rather than try to be the Iowas, the Penn States, the Ohio States. And again, I admire those guys too. They've built their programs. They've brought them they're the elite of our programs. But if they didn't have us below them to make sure that they weren't doing their job too, that it would be a bit different.
One of the unique relationships that you've had over the years is with Anthony Robles. He ultimately chose Arizona State, and you were recruiting him early.
Yes.
And before he would burst onto the scene, you get this one-legged kid from Arizona, and you and him still talk.
Oh.
And what was it about him and his story that you were intrigued to have him on your team, not just because it could be viewed as a PR stunt? Oh, you're recruiting this one-legged kid who won nationals, high school nationals.
Well, before he won the high school nationals, it was out in Cleveland, actually. It was his junior year, and he was runner-up in the nationals.
He lost to Brian Wright from Virginia.
Yes, he lost. Right, he lost. Kid. Yeah, and I saw him at the airport. We were coming. We were both leaving at the same time, and I said, "Son," I don't know what you're thinking of for next year.
And this is 103-pound junior.
Oh yeah, he was 103. He was a lightweight. I mean, you talk about 125. He had to grow at 125. And he says, "Well, Coach," he said, "I really don't have any schools that I'm looking at." He said, "Nobody's really contacted me." I said, "Son," I said, "believe me," I said, "you've got a lot of talent." I said, "You're going to have to work." I said, "You've got some difficulty there. You already know that, but you've overcome that too. And you know how to adapt and how to use, what you've got to your advantage." And he appreciated that. And I said, "Here's my card." I said, "If you're looking for a school," I said, "Drexel's in Philadelphia. You live in Arizona." I said, "I know that." I said, "But if you're looking to come east, or you would even consider," I said, "I'd like to talk to you." So the next year, then you couldn't talk to them until June of their senior year. I mean, just before their senior year.
That was July 1, right?
Yeah, July 1. And so after June, he called me on July 1. He did call. And he said, "Coach," he said, "I'm really interested in Drexel University." I said, "Wonderful, Anthony." I said, and then I got to know Judy, his mom, too. And she started talking. She said, and so he came in, and I did. I recruited him as a 125-pounder. And when he got off the plane, it was a double reason. I had to go through the NCAA because at that time he had gotten the ESPY award and he had to go to New York City to get that. And so he came to Drexel on my dime, but I could not take him to New York. Mm-hmm. So, and then he had to fly home from Drexel. So I had to tell the NCAA and, what he was doing, why we were doing it this way. No way I was going to be able to go with him up there. I couldn't. Right. So, but it did work out. But anyway, when he got off the plane to come to Drexel, I sent my assistant. I had something else I was doing at the time. So my assistant and one of my captains went over and picked him up and brought him in. And he came in the office, and he had his crutches with him. He sat down, and he says, "Coach," he said, you're just in preseason now, right?" I said, "Yes, we are." He said, "You're running tonight?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Is it open?" I said, "Sure." I said, "Preseason." I said, "We have our crew team that runs with us. We have our women's softball runs with us." I said, "Everything, so you're welcome to run with us too." He says, I said, "But do you have your prosthesis?" "Coach," he said, "let me tell you I said, "Tell me your story then, Anthony." And so he did. He said, I've never had a prosthetic. When I was 4 years old, my mom did try to get me one. He said, but it was so uncomfortable. He said, I just never wanted one. So I said, then Anthony, I said, how are you going to run with my guys? He said, Coach, he said, I can do 3 miles on my crutches. And I looked at his arms, and I know damn well I could do 3 miles. Son of a gun. So I told my captain, who was taking our runners that night, I said, guys, I said, you got a recruit here. I said, he's got crutches. You can see that. I said, let's take the middle short run, and which is about 3 miles, maybe 3.25 it was. And they said, okay.
Was that through the city?
Yeah, we go up by the zoo, across the bridge, down Riverside Drive. Yeah, in the city. Yeah. In fact, I used to, Mike, you see these pictures.
I just know how traffic can be down there. And I'm like, oh, dude, really?
It's not that. At that time, it wasn't that. But anyway, he ended up beating 18 of my wrestlers back. And at that time, I had probably a team of maybe 28, 30 guys. And he beat 18 of them back with his crutches. And I thought, this is a kid that's good, that wants to wrestle and knows what his capabilities that he has. And he's going to be a good one. And he went home, and his mom Judy called me up, and she said, Coach, she said, if you were out here, he said, you would be his coach. He said, but he's not going to get anything to go to school at Arizona. In fact, he's going to live at home his first year. And that's how it all came about. But we stayed very close all the time. In fact, Annie just came in now. My wife is here. And every year he comes at, you see him at National, he'll come over and he says hello, and he asks if Ann is here. He always wants to see Ann. And I said, yeah, she's sitting right up behind here. So he got up and he, with his crutches, jumped over the one railing, took his crutches.
Much to Sandy's behest, because do not climb over that railing.
Oh, yeah. Yes, indeed. Do not climb. But anyway, you started to come down then. But Ann, this is my wife, Ann.
Well, I met Anthony halfway down. And we had the usual hello, how are yous, and how's everything going? And his wonderful smile and a hug, which is worth the trip down the bleachers. And then when I walked back up to my seat, everybody that was sitting around me said, darn, you should have waited. So he came up to say hello so we could have met him. Yeah. Because he has that kind of wonderful personality.
And, of course, we get to see him every year now. He's doing commentary for ESPN.
ESPN, yes, he does, yeah.
Talked to Mike Cousins, who's the lead broadcaster for ESPN, about a week or so ago, and said working with him is great because he brings just that aura, that personality to it. And, of course, he ends up choosing Arizona State. Is it safe to say he's the best wrestler you never coached?
Oh, yeah. Yep. But, he did call me one time. I said, Coach, he said, I just don't know if I want to stay in here. He said, because I just keep getting beat. And, his freshman year when he redshirted, he would go to church, and he was fairly successful, but he wasn't anything they were going to see like the next 4 years.
Right.
And he said, he keeps snapping my head down. I said, Anthony, I said, what did I tell you? I said, they're going to take advantage of what you have. And you come out on the mat, first thing you do, you drop right down on your knees, right? He said, yes. I said, and they grab your head and they snap you down. And I said, where does your head go? He said, well, it has to come down, Coach. I said, exactly right. I said, so this off season, what you're going to do, you're going to get with your strength coach and you're going to build that neck and those shoulders and that head. And when they try to pop your head, he said, as soon as they reach for you and they touch your head, I said, you're in on their leg. And that's what he started to do. And you could see it. He never got taken down, he never did get snapped. The only guy that never came close to him was the kid from Utah that had the...
Ben Carr, yeah.
Yes, Ben Carr.
So there's another opportunity. When Arizona State announces that they're dropping their program, it was done for 10 days.
Yeah.
And does Jack Childs resurface there?
Yeah. Oh, I did. I wrote to the AD. I mean, not the AD. I wrote to the president. I said, and same thing I told the president at Boise State. I said, you've had All-Americans. I said, you've got a tremendous program. I said, why would you want to drop it? I said, in Boise's case, they were starting baseball. I said, baseball in
Idaho?
I said, it doesn't make any sense. I said, and Arizona State, I said, yes, the travel. I said, but you've got people out there that will donate the monies to you for your travel expenses. I said, there's no way. I said, what you need, bring in another coach, get somebody of tough name, and get the All-Americans that you've had, the national champions that you've had, bring them in and let them go, let them run with it. I said, trust me, you won't drop your program. But Boise, he didn't even care.
Yeah, they have not responded in that with the Boise thing. They've never responded favorably to an interview request. Now, as we move forward, and I want to touch on Redmond and Lushak just for a little bit, because after so long coaching at a place and being so well respected by your peers, of course, you and Gary Taylor had all those battles and Ryder and Drexel when you were basically following each other from conference to conference. But the first one, the round of 12, the blood round, you finally, Rob Redmond places at 125. Yep. And granted, he's had some life issues since then, but
yes, he has.
What's that feeling finally like? You've probably lived, dreamt of what it was going to be like or how you were going to react, but it finally came, and it was kind of a unheralded. I mean, he was, I believe, the third seed. He was the third. It was a wild card, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was third in the conference that year.
Third in the conference.
Behind, was it Noto from Hofstra?
Noto, and that's who we had to beat.
And Jose Leon from Buffalo. Boston U. Boston U. Yeah, he's a California kid.
Yes.
So he was third in the conference that year in places at the end. So explain that feeling.
Well, he got to the round of 12, and who we had to meet was Noto, who from Hofstra,
who had beaten Vega the year or two before.
He beat him in the duel. He beat him in the duel the year before. He beat him in the national. He beat him in our qualifier this year, and he beat him in the qualifier the year before that too. And so he'd never beaten him. I said, Robbie, listen to me. And when we talked, Robbie and I just finally we just made inroads, and we've communicated, and we're now back on the same wavelength, because like you said, he did have some problems. But he said, Coach, he said, you still got it. He said, I remember when you told me if I'm in on that leg, I've got to swing my head to the outside, not to the inside, because what he does, he's countered me every time, and he did. And when Robbie got in that position in overtime, now this was a tie match in the regulation. It went into overtime. Robbie got in on that single, and I just stood up and I said to my assistant, I said, it's over. I said, he's got it. He right down. Yeah.
He's still emotional.
I am.
I can see it right now. Yeah. I mean, now, and then Ryan Lushak, who one of the best guys I've ever met in the sport of wrestling. Yeah. Even though at the time, I'm an Old Dominion guy. I'm coming out of ODU. I've been part of the program with Gray Simons, and then getting to know you and Gary and the whole crew in the CAA, the old CAA. It was just, it was kind of hard because he beat one of my friends to place. But again, he was also a tough out. We had talked about Cradlers when we were at lunch about how, Austin DeSanto, the first time through you wrestle him, he's a tough out because you don't know what to expect. Right. First time you wrestle Ryan Lushak, you're in trouble because he can put you on your back and pin you pretty quickly and things that you're like, that how? Yeah. So that made him dangerous at nationals. But what was the feeling like for him, not just placing, but he beat a national champion or a national runner-up, Brian Smith, to do it.
Brian Smith, still remember him. Well, Ryan, he had, and
Shack attack, he called it.
The Shack attack, yeah. He could Metzger from any side. Everybody thinks he had, did you lateral drop him? I said, no. If you read the quote, I said, but he Metzgered him, much to the crowd's delight and my delight too. This was Paulson in the quarterfinals. That he, it just went back and forth. Ryan was up on him by 3 points, and he'd come back and he'd take Ryan down.
I remember the fans being totally into that match. That got a standing O at the end of the match.
I never heard the crowd ever. It was just
for a Drexel kid,
for anybody.
We've heard some crazy ones after Caldwell and Ryan Lang when they were throwing each other around for about 91 seconds, and then some of these battles. But Can the blood round, the round of 12, take years off a coach's life?
Yeah, it can. I said the last 30 seconds of a match, I said it's like eternity. I said, I do not know how these basketball coaches, how they can live as long as they do, and because it's just those last 30 seconds that just, especially if it's in a tight match. And that match was stiff. It was overtime. And Ryan had to take him, and he got in on the kid. And I just said, I don't know. And I looked, but he just got in, and he locked his hands regular, and he pulled the leg, and he used his head. And he swept the leg out, and down he went. Sif went down. And he knew it. And, boy, I tell you, it was some win. Because that guy he was second. He was ranked second or first all year long.
He was one of the top seeds.
He's one of the top seeds.
I think he might have been the top. No, Paulson might have been the top seed.
Yeah.
It was one of those situations where, he was ranked pretty high. And
because he was runner-up the year before.
Right. And when it comes time to hang it up, I mean, coaches never stay retired because you're still active with the NCAA and at the NCAA championships, but why was it the right time for you to say, all right, because people don't have 35. The only people that have coaching careers as long as you do now are coaches that have been coaching as long as you do, like Pat Pecora at Pitt Johnstown's over 40 years. Bucky Mon was over 40 years. Yeah. Gary was 38, 39 years at Ryder. I mean, when is it the right time to retire?
I knew it because I could not go. I can still demonstrate and I could still show my moves and I still had the authority. I really, that when I talk, the guys would listen to me. But I just didn't have that skill to wrestle with them live on the mat. And I knew it was my time. I just knew I couldn't I said, they've got to have somebody that's going to go with them. They need a younger coach. Because I had assistant coaches I didn't have a full-time assistant until my last 2 years at Drexel.
Yeah, because you had a rotating door. You'd have some names that would come help you out, but
yeah, exactly.
They were helping. They weren't. They were not full-time employed.
And some of them were more disadvantaged than they were helping too. So we talked about
still learning and
yes, exactly. But so I knew then, and the last year, always prior to the last year, when practice was over, I'd go up to the training room. I want to see the trainers, because I had kids who were hurt. Is he okay? Will I have him this weekend? So on and so forth. And then, but that last year, I would send my assistant. So I said, go up and find out, how Robbie's doing, how he's feeling, and I'd stay in the room. And I'd go over and I'd sit down and talk, rub their heads and talk to them. And invariably, they'd throw me on them. A couple of guys would grab a hold of me and we'd get on the mat. I said, guys, you wrestle guys, don't fight fair. I said, I'll tear your throat. I would fish hook them and eye them. But it was just, I knew then that I was going to give up the year before when I was 65. And Justy said, Dad, he said, why do you want to quit now? He said, Nationals are in Philadelphia next year. He said, you got to be. And I was already on their board, I worked locally with the Philadelphia Sports Congress and everything. So I said, yeah, you're right. So I decided I would stay that last year. So that's how but I did know. I had known that it was time, and I had talked with Ann about it, and she said, if that's how you feel, then certainly that's. And she's 4 years younger than I am, so she was going to teach them their 4 years.
I thought it was probably 40.
Well, it looks that way. It does look that. Yeah. But
you old dog, you.
I had to marry somebody younger just to keep up with me. That's what
When you look back at, 35 years just of college coaching, and then everything that began from not even wrestling in high school to working now kind of as a head table role at the NCAA and still being around it. Is there one thing that you got from the sport that you feel is above all else?
That's another interesting question, Jason. I think it's the mutual respect that I have for the sport itself and for my peers, the coaches, and I know they respect me too. There's not one of them, even the new ones who, I watch them come up through the ranks. But when I'm at the head table and I have to call them over, and let them know that they just got a warning, or as far as they've just, I'll give you Jay's story in a couple of minutes.
Oh, boy.
But,
See?
on the video review, I have to tell them. And they all come over, and some of them are very contrite, and they say, yeah, Coach, I understand. He said, yeah, I take it. And I've had a couple come over and say, yeah, and I'm damn glad I did that. Coach, or that official, he was just, he said he didn't know. I said, better be careful. I said, this is our head official right here sitting beside me. At that time, it was usually Pat McCormick was with me. But it's the respect that I have for those coaches, and I'm sure the respect they've got for me too. So that, yeah. And the love of the sport.
So many impressive stories that we could probably spend hours talking about. We've just scratched the surface with Jack Childs. Thanks for lunch. Thanks for parking, and thanks for just being who you are.
Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate it.
The Short Time Wrestling Podcast is proudly outfitted by Compound Clothing. Shirts, singlets, custom gear orders, everything you need. Call up Cliff and the crew at cmpteamwear.com. First time listening? Well, you can change that by going to matttalkonline.com/get-short-time to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or listen on your favorite podcatcher at matttalkonline.com/listen.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to matttalkonline.com.